Hi, I'm Jamie. This is Dead Studebaker Garage, I guess. And this, of course, a 61 Hawk with a Supercharged 289. I recently released a video that took me about a year to produce, getting this car back together. And since then, it's grown into my second most popular video of all time, probably, by the time you're seeing this. So I thought I'd do a follow-up and address some of the questions, comments, and then show you the progress on the car. Comment number 1. Those are the wrong expansion plugs. You're an idiot. Oh, actually, first, comment number 2. This is not my car. This is my friend Dave's car. You don't have to get it away from me. It'll leave just as soon as it can. Let's talk about plugs. As I attempted to communicate in the first video, I did not build this engine. The builder of this engine is a well-known and well-regarded member of the Studebaker community. These are the plugs he installed. That is a brass Welch plug, a flat type plug. They are installed backwards and hammered into place, or peened. This is what popped out twice before I put in another set of plugs. Can we all agree this is the correct type of plug for this engine? Can we all agree it was, give or take, installed correctly? It didn't hold. So I'm done with that. Now, one could make an argument for steel being a better material for those plugs. I don't know, and I'm not planning to find out. I am fully aware that that type of plug was commonplace and in use for many decades on archaic engines like this one. Here is one of the plugs I installed. This is a shallow 1.5" cup. My thinking with this was, because it's so shallow, I could probably knock it in the correct direction for one of these cup style plugs and get it sealed before it hit the shelf behind the plug. It didn't work that way. Then I decided I'd be clever, turn these around backwards, and use them like a flat plug. Obviously, it didn't work out that way either, but I already had them, and I thought it would. Lesson learned. I'm not in the habit of gooping plugs with silicone like this either. I thought it might be a good idea given the unideal situation with this. Again, it did nothing. We won't be repeating that experiment. Someone in the comments yesterday went on a tear because I referred to these as freeze plugs. I am fully aware, as well you should be, they don't necessarily pop out and save your block when it freezes. You cannot rely on them to do that. They probably won't. And if your coolant freezes to the point that the plugs are popping out, your block's probably cracking anyway. They're not for freeze protection. However, people call them freeze plugs. It's a colloquially accepted term, and I'm using it. Is there a problem with that? I don't think so. The engine now has rubber plugs and a 7 PSI radiator cap. It's good. It's gonna be just fine. How about we just go ahead and never speak of this again? Also in the comments, I was accused of complaining. What I'm trying to illustrate here is the ups and downs of building a car like this. You know, if you want to build a classic, you might have a good time, you'll probably have an okay time, and there's a really good chance you'll have a horrible time. So I just want to illustrate that for people who might attempt this in the future. You know, it's not all roses and puppy dog kisses or whatever I said in my live stream yesterday. Building a car, especially a classic car like this, a weird one that you really can't get parts for, with aftermarket pieces like a 5-speed transmission that doesn't belong there, a new carrier and axle shafts, and a bunch of different things you have to piece together, it's challenging. It's not like it looks like on TV. And if there's one takeaway you get from my channel, I want it to be that. This is fun and I enjoy it, but man, there are some not fun moments. I guess I will take a moment to say, I do value your comments. You know, at least the ones containing constructive criticism. Downright insults, kind of pointless, but they still help improve my video's reach, and that makes me money. So thank you very much for that. I'm not a moron. I am a Mopar guy. I'm not a Studebaker guy. It's not usually what we do around here. So this entire thing has been quite the learning experience for me. Just bear that in mind. Ah yes, and to the hundreds of new subscribers that came from the first Studebaker video, thanks for joining. I hope you like what you see. This is a soldering iron, and it is my friend. At least I hope it's my friend. I don't know if this one actually works. If it doesn't, well, I've got options. There should be a cordless one here somewhere. Yay, fire. The soldering iron is the choice tool for melting / burning holes through your new carpet to shove bolts through for things like your seats. Delicious smoke. Don't breathe that. It's super bad for you, probably. I know I mentioned the short bolt problem. Because the new insulation is so thick, most of these don't reach. A few of them do. Now you may be thinking to yourself, Jamie, we watched you build the shifter. Why didn't you just make it not hit the passenger seat? Honestly, I don't know either. You ever find yourself wondering what type of cancer a given activity will give you eventually? The unfortunate truth of working on cars is a lot of the compounds we encounter on a day-to-day basis are super not good for you. So, I don't know, do with that information what you will. I got exactly 2 of them started, and I can't find any longer bolts here, so I'm off on an adventure to buy more. Meanwhile, I've got the heater going full blast, so I'm sure it'll be like a degree warmer when I get back. Let's see if my shop truck wants to run today. Well, it doesn't love the cold, I can tell you that. Oh, I'd prefer if you did not do that. Basically the pinnacle of reliability and automotive excellence. Excellent visibility too. And it's only raining on me a little. The more I wipe it, the worse it gets. Yay, we did it. Breakfast. I swear this isn't my fault. Passenger seat, mounted. Seats, seated. Nice. Moving on, engine tune-up. Couple notes. First off, at least one commenter said, man, I expected a supercharged Studebaker to do more. Well, this is a brand new engine, so I'm not pushing it that hard. The throttle is not adjusted to get 100% full open throttle. And more than that, the tune-up on it currently is very conservative. So, it will do more, just not yet. One commenter said that the supercharged Studebaker engine used a 2-barrel. No. There's the Carter 4-barrel carburetor that they used. There's a factory carb hat that conveniently fits onto it. And of course, the matching hose. It's a Carter 4-barrel. Another commenter referring to the interesting idling problem I currently have, where it gets into and out of the vacuum advance, which does weird things to the idle speed, indicated that the vacuum advance must be connected to manifold vacuum and not ported vacuum because ported vacuum was only used in the emissions era. Allow me to direct your attention to the hard plumbed vacuum advance line that goes to ported vacuum. Any other questions? The ported versus manifold vacuum advance debate is still raging on the internet, and I am going to have more thoughts on that in the near future. I'm going to do an entire video about it, in fact. In the meantime, just be aware that this is plumbed the way it's supposed to be, the way it was set up from the factory. This special carburetor for this application literally does not have the nipple that you would use if you wanted to set up your vacuum advance on manifold vacuum. Anyway, back to tuning. Timing. I followed Studebaker's recommendation, which is 24 degrees of advance at 1600 RPM. That's their spec for this supercharged R2 engine. It didn't like it, and there are a couple reasons for that. The camshaft in this engine is very much not stock at all. It's pretty rowdy, as you've heard in the exhaust noise clips. It sounds great, but if there's one thing I know about aggressive camshafts, it's that they want a lot of base timing to be happy. Using that spec, the base timing number ends up being something like 4 degrees, which I'll just tell you right now is not enough. And that is why the engine idles up so much when the vacuum advance kicks in. Everything about that is telling me this thing wants more base timing. The problem is supercharger. We could run into detonation if I crank the distributor up. So we may be getting into a recurve distributor. First though, I'm going to try some specs I've read from Studebaker enthusiasts on the internet. The most useful numbers I've seen that seem to me to be close to what this engine wants, 10 to 12 degrees base, and about 32 total. Now, of course, that does not take into account vacuum advance. In heavy vacuum situations, during cruise, there will be a considerable amount more. But under boost, the vacuum advance goes away. There will be none. So, I mean, that sounds about right. Another commenter said that we need to dyno tune this engine so it's safe. And I'm inclined to agree, mostly because of the number of things that were changed during the engine overhaul. The cam is completely different, the compression is different, everything is different, and we don't know what's safe and what isn't. Right now, I'm kind of just making educated guesses to try and improve things, but I certainly don't want to get into a dangerous situation where there's too much boost, too much timing, and we're melting this thing to pieces. Now I've basically built a career myself out of tuning these things by ear. I kind of have a knack for it. And I'm proud of that, but it really only applies to these naturally aspirated engines. When you add boost, things get different, and the stakes are much higher. As I may have mentioned before, a bunch of hardware went missing during the course of this build. I'm not really sure about this return spring setup. It's definitely not ideal. We don't want the throttle sticking open on a supercharged engine. That would be bad. I know I showed and made mention of the leaking fluid from the supercharger when I first got it running. Turns out you don't want to free run those. You don't want them running with no back pressure, you know. I had this pipe disconnected to prime the carburetor, and that is most likely why it was spewing oil everywhere. Just know that you shouldn't run them with the hat off. Ah, the Carter AFB. My old friend. My favorite carburetor. Well, other than the ABS. Well, and the ABS too. Now, as mentioned, this is not an original R2 supercharged car. I don't know if this was an R2 dual point distributor or a single point. Kind of looks like it was a single point. Anyway, it's got a Pertronic skid in it now, so that's great. I did check the advance mechanism. It's moving happily, so that's ideal. But the rotor is kind of loose in here. I usually just put a little piece of electrical tape in here to close up the gap. Works pretty well. Much better. No more flopping around. We definitely don't want our rotor flopping around. This is a good time to check the vacuum advance diaphragm. It does work. Of course, I already knew that because of the way this thing behaves. Now, just so we're all on the same page, I actually have already given the timing a bump since the end of the last video. It cold started horrible, and I knew something was up, so. That's where we're at right now. Numerically, I have no idea how much advance it is, so we're gonna find out. Now, I've shown this on video before, but I did get questions about it recently, so I thought I'd show it again. This is my Innova digital dial back timing light. I use the heck out of this thing. It's invaluable for tuning old engines like this. And I do now have that boost vacuum gauge plumbed into the vacuum advance line. There are no other small fittings on this engine that I could use to get full-time manifold vacuum, so that's what we're gonna have to live with. Unfortunately, that means at a correct idle, we're gonna get no reading out of this thing. And I really like checking vacuum at idle, so that kind of sucks. Opinion question. Should the main accessory output on the ignition switch be loose? Digging into the electrical system a bit more, it's janky, but it's also all wired point to point, so it's kind of easy to see what's going on. For example, the dead coolant temperature gauge. That would be because the wire is just kind of hanging out. We're missing a piece, so I'm gonna have to reconstruct that really fast, and then maybe we can have a coolant gauge. Now, I was wondering about the tachometer, and I'm not banking on my ability to make it work, but the random plug down here next to the gearbox comes straight from it. So that's interesting. Oh. Well, that's not pretty. I'm gonna go back to assuming that will never work again. I disconnected the battery, and now I'm trying to get in here to tighten this deal. You don't want loose connections on your ignition switch. Loose connections lead to high resistance. High resistance leads to extra draw of amperage and heat, and that's not what you want. This sending unit has a flat connector point on the top. There's supposed to be a slide-on connector. Of course, I don't have any of those, but you can take a female spade like this one, and with a little bit of light modification, it'll do this job great. You always have 10,000 of these bullet connectors. Till you need them, then you have one in the whole shop. Fixed. Come on, guy. I've got it dialed at about that 12 degrees base. Seems to be about 32 total, plus vacuum advance. I'm gonna go see how that performs on the street. I am planning to route the vacuum and boost gauge so I can see it. I'm really curious what kind of boost this thing is making. Oh yeah, another issue I need to deal with here is the hood latch, which sometimes doesn't. I've been told this is a common problem. I need to adjust this so the stake gets further down there and fully locks. And apparently some people even drill a hole through them and put a hood pin in for the utmost of safety. I don't know if I'm gonna go that hard, but we'll see. We certainly do not want to see this hood wrapped up over the roof. That would be bad. I oiled the components in the hood latch, and that made a huge difference. It actually does what it's supposed to now. Latches. Admire my professional boost gauge installation. It's still lazy right off idle. Yeah. Fast forward to me recurving this distributor. Every time I put a load on it and go to move it, it no longer idles. Yeah. It doesn't like lugging. Oh, party! You can clearly hear it pick up when the vacuum comes in. As far as this timing setting for power, it likes it. This is my first real test of the speedometer, and it does work, but it's not accurate. That says 45, and it's actually like 36 or 7 or something. This is awesome. The sun's actually shining. The bees are singing or whatever. Oh, I think I need to put the front license plate back on. I did a video a couple months back called Performance Timing Curves for Dummies Like Me. In that video, I talked about engines sort of telling us what they want and recurving distributors to reach that end. Go watch that for more background. This is basically the same story. This thing is telling me it wants more base advance, but I can't give it more base advance because then it will have too much advance at high RPM. And especially with the supercharger, that's bad. A very common modification for an aggressive cam and a performance engine is to delete the vacuum advance. In this case, we want to use it because an advance unit that gives advance under vacuum takes away that advance under boost. That way the timing can be boost sensitive. We need to limit the amount of advance we can get out of the distributor so we can get more base advance and then still use the vacuum for that advantage. Vacuum advance is helpful for other reasons too. It can increase your fuel mileage for one thing. Man, this thing sounds awesome. Because of the advance curve this thing currently has, there's just not a lot of power on the bottom end at all. And then when that advance starts coming in, it's on. I have not seen a boost reading any higher than 2 on this gauge, and to reach that I had to push pretty hard. This is the screwy back and forth I was talking about in the first video. Just a little bit more throttle opening leads to the vacuum advance kicking in, and then it revs way up. With the throttle open just that little bit, it hangs there. It holds the advance higher and it won't idle down. When it finally loses that vacuum advance, it does start dropping down, and then it does things like that. This is the downside to relying on that vacuum advance to get enough advance for your engine. When the vacuum goes away, that advance goes away. That's why I don't like to use it as part of my base timing number. And when you've got it on manifold vacuum, that's exactly what you're doing. Just weird. Won't even idle really right now. Anyway, part of that is because the timing is actually at 8 degrees, even though I put it at 12 and the distributor is definitely tight. So that's interesting. The steering pump reservoir is still puking fluid everywhere, which is terrible. Ew! Also, we're getting a good bit of breather oil. Remind me to keep it out of the boost for now. This engine really needs to be like run in more. I am kind of doing things out of order here. Unfortunately, I kind of have to. I really need the timing to be set such that the car will continue to run when it comes to a stop, but also that it's safe. Funny story about that. I hadn't disconnected the vacuum advance yet and it was showing 8 degrees. What just happened? Now I don't want to spend this entire video on distributor tuning because again I am planning to do a separate video on that, and the whole boost issue makes this special. However, I did find that it has its best and happiest idle at 40 degrees of base advance. It pings like crazy as soon as you open the throttle and it hasn't even made boost yet, so obviously we can't stay there. I've backed it off to 32 degrees base advance, and it no longer pings like crazy immediately after opening the throttle, but we do know that won't be a tenable setting. Aggressive camshafts want a lot of base timing. That's the lesson. That was 32. This is 22. I haven't touched the idle screw or the mixtures or anything. Just back the timing off. What do you think it's going to be like at 12? Definitely worse. Yeah, that's cool. Unlike a lot of engines, the built-on timing tab is accurate according to my digital light. Even at 22 degrees, it's hesitant. It doesn't jump up off idle like you'd expect it to. Maybe I'm expecting it to be something it isn't. But it should be peppy, you know? I wish there was a manifold vacuum port on this thing. It might be nice to test that as part of the recurve process. All right, what I was trying to accomplish here is to map out the distributor and see what we've got for a curve. It's 20 degrees. But in the process of doing that, I think I've discovered another issue. It won't idle anymore. It's running worse and worse. It's acting like there's a vacuum leak, but I sure can't find one. I just dialed in an extra entire turn on the idle mixture screws, and it runs better than it did, but still bad. And it smells super rich out the tailpipes, so I don't know what to think about that. It ain't that. Okay, I figured it out. And by it, I mean a new exciting problem. You may be wondering why we're in the driveway. Barely in the driveway, in fact. Car cut out and died on a test drive. And my phone was dead, so I didn't get to capture the moment. I knew the symptom though. Carburetor was running out of fuel. So that's not good. So I've come to the fuel filter here, and other than the couple drips coming out, it's dry. It's certainly not a clogged fuel filter, so that's news. Well, how about that fuel filter? Nope. It's out of gas. Gauge is inaccurate, turns out. I seriously thought I was gonna wash this car today and just like be done with it. Back in the world's most reliable shop truck to go get gas. Yeah, no gauge lights. Not that that matters, the speedometer doesn't work anyway. I think we all learned a valuable lesson. Things are getting exciting here. It's definitely charging and the headlights are fine, so. I went over a bump and everything went back to normal, but then it came back. Yeah, gremlins. Once again, everything changes for no reason. It won't idle anymore. Well, kind of, sort of, barely, sometimes. Nice. All right, now this is interesting. I just went out and, made an attempt at cutting the rings in. Run the engine at different RPMs, speed up, slow down, let the engine brake you, and that seems to have changed the amount of vacuum available. I just took a whole turn out of the idle screws, which I had already tried warm before and it didn't like it. Now it likes it. Of course, it was almost out of gas before too. It could be a fuel quality issue, I guess. The point is it's getting better, so that's the good news. Huh. It's more responsive now too. Recall from the first video, one brake was a little tight. Didn't magically fix itself, so I loosened it up. This drum is definitely not perfectly round. I also took a minute and snugged up the oil pan bolts because they're oil pan bolts. They always magically loosen themselves. Several commenters recommended a swap to disc brakes. And while I've been a fan of drums for years, at this point in history, I'm thinking that's kind of a good idea. This brake hose on the front left is not looking too hot either, so if the drums did stay, I suppose it's time for an overhaul. The one mechanical thing on the original list for this car that I have not yet touched, front sway bar. There's a bigger upgraded one in the trunk. I know that brake's good because the car rolls when I lean on it now. Anyway, sway bar. 5.5 years and I'd never pulled it out of the trunk before. So I just did, and I found out that 2 of these metal brackets and one of the rubber bushings are just not here. This bar is substantially larger than the one that's on it now, so I can't reuse the original hardware. Time for one last test drive before I call it a night. Let's see if loosening that brake helps me to not kill it every 5 feet. Oh, this is so much better. Wow. Okay. Nice. Way less dying. That made a really big difference in how it takes off. I know that probably sounds obvious, but that brake was barely dragging and it was enough to make a huge difference. To the "I thought it would be faster" crowd, it kicks sideways in second gear, part throttle, dry pavement. Just saying. I've decided it's good enough to drive to the gas station. It's first time entering civilization in 5.5 years. We'll see how it goes. Oh, we can't go to that gas station, it's broken. Nice. Hey, this is getting pretty good. It's holding together. It's running great. It's really fun to drive. And of course, you know, chooch noises. Extended back road test drive. So far, so good. It's kind of pretty out here, even when it's dark. Headlights need adjusted. These are the high beams. Finally cruising in 5th gear. This is nice. You know, that bigger sway bars sound like a good idea. Now I'm really starting to like this car, but I do have to say, compared to the Mopars I'm used to, the handling leaves something to be desired. But, you know, it was engineered in like the 50s, at best. Nice. I've got the world's brightest headlights behind me, but good time to learn that the Stude does have a day-night mirror. Okay, that was about an 8-mile run, and the last couple times I've accelerated, I heard the faintest note of pinging. Now, I've had questions about pinging. I'm not going to demonstrate it on this engine, but I will demonstrate it on one of my pieces of junk one of these days soon. Anyway, it needs less timing. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm pleased. It's come quite a long way from dumping coolant all over the floor like 1,000 times. It's a working car now, and that's great. Well, the power steering leak hasn't gotten any better, so I guess sealing that cap is my next nightmare. I said in the first video that no one would watch it. Boy, was I wrong. I had no intentions of making follow-up videos on this car. But people love it, so I'm going to keep you updated on this. It's running way better. It's actually drivable. I didn't get to wash it, but still, I feel like I made a lot of progress today. Don't ask me to restore your Studebaker. I don't want to do that. But I am finally at a point where I can say, this thing is awesome. And now I look forward to driving it again. Until then, as usual, thank you very much for watching. And remember, if you can't keep it, hawk it.